everybody, Mariana with Three Peaks Classroom. Have you ever been too nervous to start guided reading? Maybe you tried a session and it completely flopped, or maybe you felt like you weren't doing it the right way. If you've ever felt like that, you are in the right place, because in today's episode, I want to share with you how to actually do a guided reading session. In today's video, I want to talk about the materials that you might want to have on hand, how to prep for a guided reading session. What does a beginning of a guided reading session look like? What can you do in the middle? How do you wrap up a session? And how do you know when it's time to switch things up? So first of all, guided reading ain't happening if you don't have classroom management sorted out in your classroom. That needs to be put in place first. That's just the reality of it. You're not going to be able to sit with a small group of students if you've got chaos going on around you. And I know in today's climate, that's getting a lot more difficult. I know the behaviors in the class and the needs in the classroom are getting a lot higher, but to be frank, you won't be able to sit down and focus on the instruction with your small group of kids, again, if you've got things going on around you. So first, you have to make sure that your classroom management is good to go. I always run my guided reading sessions during my daily 5 rotations, but you can really actually do it anytime. Just because, you're teaching social studies or kids are working on a social studies project doesn't mean you can't do guided reading. I actually one year had a student that barely showed up to class for various reasons. So whenever he was present, I actually quickly grabbed him and the 2 other kids that were supposedly in his group. And I would sit down with them and I would really quickly bust out a really fast guided reading session with them, because I wanted to work with that student and I wanted to maximize my time with that student because he was so far behind. I really wanted to, make sure that practice was super targeted. So let's not overthink this. Remember that guided reading is just meant to be responsive to the students' needs. Since we're in January, I'm hoping and assuming that you've already met with your students individually and you know exactly where they're at in terms of their reading level. You kind of know what they're doing well, and you definitely know what they can work on to become a better reader. Using that information, you will be grouping your students. Do you have any kids that need help with decoding? I'm talking about struggling readers, they mix up their vowel sounds, or they have a hard time with sight words. Maybe they're having a hard time blending the sounds in an individual word, or they're having a hard time with fluency. Those are your readers that need help with decoding. You are going to put them in a group. Now, I recommend students that are working on decoding, I recommend that you don't have groups larger than 3 or 4. I know class sizes aren't that small anymore, so realistically having a group of 3 or 4 is probably not realistic, but that is ideal. If you can have a group of 3 kids or 4 kids sitting with you, I would recommend it for these kiddos because they are the ones that are struggling the most and they are the ones that need that attention the most. If you're not sure which decoding strategies to work on with those students, I do have a free printable that you can grab. It's from my website. You can go to threepeaksclassroom.com/guided reading, and here it's a 4-page document. So 2 pages are for decoding and 2 pages are for comprehension. And so like I mentioned, if you have students that are working on decoding skills, I've broken this chart up into 3 parts. So if a student is struggling with something here, this is the strategy you're going to want to use with them. And then here are some prompts that you can say during your guided reading session. I'm going to go more into detail about these specific cheat sheets in episode 3 of this series. So if that's something that you're interested in, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode where we go into detail about these guided reading strategies. Okay, so if this was me making my guided reading groups, this is legitimately what I do. I have my class list of students. I have all of their reading levels from Fountas and Pinnell because in my district, that's what we use to test students' reading. I also have a little note about what I've told the kids that they need to work on. So maybe that's comprehension, maybe that's accuracy, maybe that's fluency, whatever. Anybody that has a low reading level and they're working on accuracy, I take the lowest readers that I have and I put them in my first group. That is my very first decoding group. Then I will look at the next and I'll look at the next lowest kiddos and I'll put them in a group. And then as we're building our way up, I'll notice that, okay, these kids are working on comprehension. I'm going to put those guys in a group. And then usually my high flyers, I'll put them in a group and we'll work on author's purpose or author's intention, and we'll work on expression, those kinds of things that I can challenge them and I can enrich them with. I know I'm going to get this question, so I'm going to just answer right now. Do I meet with every single one of my students in a guided reading session? And the answer is no. That's my honest answer. I do not meet with each one of my students in a guided reading session. I feel like the guided reading session is meant to target students that are really struggling, and they get my targeted, focused instruction from me. That doesn't mean that I don't meet with my students, every single one of my students. I absolutely do. But those kids that are my high flyers, that are already reading at or above grade level, they already have really good comprehension, I'll still meet with them individually once every 2 months. I'll be honest here, once every couple of months, because we know how big classes are. And when I meet with them, I'll say, wow, you're doing a great job doing this, this, and this. I really want you to focus on your expression, and I want you to do that by really noticing the punctuation or whatever. So to be honest, no, I don't meet with every single one of my students. I meet with the most critical students in my class. It's kind of like doing triage. Of course, in an ideal classroom, you would meet with every single one of your students in a nice, targeted, guided reading session. But let's be real, that's just not happening. You're going to want to think about what you call your groups and your guided reading session. I call my sessions book club, and I have a little printout here, and I glued it on top of a notebook. I'll talk about my materials in a second, but I call it book club, and I label my groups by color. So I'll say, okay, boys and girls, I'm going to do book club with group orange. So if you are in the orange group, please come meet me at the back table. They are not required to bring anything. I have everything that they need at the table. They just literally have to plop their bodies right at the table so that they're ready to go for guided reading. Speaking of materials, I have some materials laid out here. These are the physical materials, and then I have some resources as well that I'm going to talk about. But some materials you might want to have on hand when you're doing guided reading is, I love having a caddy, because then the caddy just goes behind me. I have a shelf in my classroom behind me, and then I just pull it out. And then when I start a guided reading session, again, this is mostly with my decoding group. So every student gets a notebook like this. This is actually from my classroom. I grabbed it. So you can see we've already been working on it. This is my decoding group that are working on, vowel sounds. So some things you might want to have, like I said, notebooks, pencils for sure. I'm supposed to have 5 in here, but I have 4 right now. I flag everything with a yellow flag. That way I know it's mine. Pencils are almost always sharpened. If not, I have a special helper of the day that sharpens my pencils for me. I have highlighters so that they can highlight important parts in the work that they're doing. Scissors, because when I'm working with my kids, they might have to cut and paste some activities like word work activities, so I have scissors. I also have a bunch of glue sticks in here as well. These are just for fun. I haven't actually used these yet, but these are those little they highlight the passage. So I have a bunch of those. And kids are welcome to use those. They get to put it on top of the sentence that they are reading. And then these ones are a hot commodity. And let me tell you a little tip. Michael's has these on clearance after Halloween always, and I got a bag of like 12 of these for like $1, I think it was. So my kids love to pick one. Some of them, sometimes they don't pick one at all, and that's fine, they don't have to, but I like to have those fun things on hand for when we're getting ready to do our guided reading session. A couple of other things that I have on hand, it depends on your group, but like I mentioned before, that one boy that used to come late all the time or infrequently, he was working on blending sounds into words. And so I had these cards ready to go, and then I would just hand them out to the kids, to him particularly, but to all the kids in the group so that they could practice, and they were practicing blending those sounds. And then if my guided reading session was running a little fast, I always had an activity ready to go. Again, this is like a puzzle, and they had to match the letters up as well. So I just like having a couple of extra activities with me, behind me, so that in case a session runs a little bit too long, I can hand those out. I also wanted to mention some resources that I follow in my classroom for guided reading. I have levels A to H, I believe. So I'm just going to show you level A. I got this all printed and ready to go when I knew that this student was going to be in my classroom. I know I had in my grade 3 classroom, I had a student that was coming in reading as a non-reader. And I think that's becoming more and more common in our classrooms, actually. So anyways, instead of lamenting about it, I was prepared, and I printed off this guided reading kit. Now, I'll link it down below, but it's from TPT. It's from Karen Jones. And she has a whole bundle for like guided reading levels A to E, for example, and then you can go from like F to to J, I believe. So it's a lot of printing. It's a lot of printing, but I printed it all once and I organized it all and it's ready to go. In here, they have a ton of activities. They even give you an outline on how to run the guided reading session. Here's like your pre-activity. Here's your during activity, yada, yada. And then this is where I have those activities where the kids can cut and paste and put them inside their notebooks. So I highly recommend this resource if you were like me, or if you are like me and you were very nervous to start guided reading and you have a lot of low readers in your class and you have no idea what to even do, where to begin. I highly recommend that you grab yourself this resource. It's going to save you a lot of mental stress, honestly. It'll save you time in some regard. I mean, it's gonna take some time to get this binder and activities ready, but it's gonna save you time in the fact that you don't have to branch out and look for activities and figure out what you want to do. So if you are struggling and you're not sure, I highly recommend that you take a look at this resource on TPT. No affiliate links or anything like that. It's just one teacher to another. I'm letting you know this is what saved me and I highly recommend it. Another issue that might be holding you back from starting guided reading is maybe you don't have multiple copies of the same text. Like maybe you don't have a bunch of decodable readers in your classroom. Don't let that stop you from doing guided reading, honestly. You can always use fewer copies, or like I mentioned in the episode previous, you can always just use one book and share it. It's not ideal, but it's better than not doing guided reading at all. To source books for guided reading, your school might already have like a resource room that already has bins. You just have to go and ask somebody that might know of that. So there might be a resource room. What I did one year was I lamented to my admin and I said, I really want to do this, but I don't have, readers that are for this low of a group. And I've borrowed so many from the teachers, but I don't have like a group set. And so we actually had a subscription to Raz Kids, and they were able to go and order some just black and white paper copies of these books for levels A to E, I believe. And I had them all in bins ready to go for my lowest readers so that I could help them. And I could do guided reading. So now we've talked about how to group your students. We've talked about materials and resources that you might need. Now let's dive in and talk about what does an amazing guided reading session look like? Because let's be honest, not all of them are amazing. Step number 1, you're going to want to gather your students and give your students a copy of the text with the instructions of do not open your book. They're going to sit at the table. You're going to give them the text and you're going to say, don't open it. We're going to open it together. Step number 2 is you're going to ask them to make a prediction. Let's look at the cover. Let's look at the title, or let's look at the table of contents and let's brainstorm. Do you think it's a fictional book, nonfiction? Who do you think this is going to be about? What are the characters? What's the topic? What's the setting? When do you think this took place? You're going to do a lot of predicting based on the front cover, the title, or the table of contents in the book. Step number 3 is you're going to introduce the book. You're going to open up to the first page, and before reading, you are going to look for clues in the pictures or the big words that jump out to you, and you're going to make any sort of connections to prior knowledge. So maybe there's going to be a picture of a goat, and there's a caption underneath that says a baby goat is called a kid, and then you're going to talk to your students, has anybody seen a baby goat before? You're going to talk to your kids about that. This is where you're going to introduce them to some vocabulary that you're going to be looking out for. So maybe you're going to say, all right, my friends, today we are going to focus on finding words that have a long A sound. So while we're reading the story, just keep in the back of your mind, we're listening for that A sound. And then after we're done reading our section, we're going to come back and we're going to notice any words that are long A. Then you're going to want to make sure that you've split the text into 3 or 4 kind of sessions. So you're going to do a quick little read, and then come back and talk about your activity, and then quick little read, and then come back and do your activity, and then quick little read. So you're kind of going back and forth like this. Once you've broken up the book into 3 or 4 sections, then you can decide how do you want the students to read this. You can choose everybody at your table. Everybody is reading silently or whispering to themselves. That's fine. You can do that. Or you can have everybody reads to themselves, and this one student is whispering to you. Or you can all read it together. Let's say you take turns. So this student is going to read one sentence and then this student, or you can mix it up and you can have this student read first, they can read one page, and then you pick this student to read another page and then stop. Once you've read your passage, that is when you are going to be intentional about your task. This is where the strategy that you picked from your cheat sheet, this is where you're going to be intentional about your learning task. So for kids that are decoding, let's use that example for long A, you're going to say, all right, my friends, let's go back and look at those 2 pages. Can anybody point to a word where you can hear an A sound? And that's, what they're doing. Or can anybody point out, maybe you're working on sight words, can anybody point out any words that you notice that are on our word wall as well? Whatever. For kids that are working on comprehension, you might ask them to, maybe they've read a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, and you've stopped, and you can say, okay, so can you tell me what is happening in the story right now? And can you tell me who are the main characters about? And can you tell me, why do you think the characters decided to da-da-da-da-da? So just a reminder, you're going to call your students for a guided reading session. Everyone's going to sit down. You're going to pass the books out to them. You're going to remind them, don't open the book yet. Then you're going to look at the front cover together and you're going to notice the title. You're going to notice the pictures. You're going to look in and look at the table of contents, and you're going to start talking about the book. You're going to do a book talk. You're going to make predictions. What do you think this is going to be about? When do you think this is taking place? Then you are going to set the parameters. Okay, my friends, I want everybody to open their books and we're going to read the first 2 paragraphs. And once you're done reading the paragraphs, I want you to stop. You can go ahead and you can whisper read to yourselves. Once you've set the task, then you will do the thinking task with the students after. It's really important in a guided reading session that you instill in students that this is a book club. This is a book talk. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear you reading. It's okay if you make mistakes. That's why we're here. We're here to practice and we're here to get better. Everybody is here to think and talk about this book. I want to see what you write down as your answers. I want you to share that with the whole group. This is our work club. So really instill in that in the students that this is our book club where we work together, think together, read together. All right, once you've done that first kind of reading the section and then doing your thinking task, then you're going to move on and you're going to say, okay, let's read the next 2 paragraphs. This time, I really want you to pay attention to whatever. And then once they're done reading those 2 paragraphs, then you're going to come back and you're going to focus on that strategy again. If you have a lot of time in the world, maybe you run these tasks 3 times. Maybe they read a section, do a task, read a section, do a task, read a section, do a task. But if you don't have all the time in the world, I do recommend that you try and fit in at least 2 rounds of it in a single guided reading session. Finally, you're going to finish up your guided reading session by reviewing kind of what you guys practiced today. Make sure that you are writing down notes as well. So if you're noticing that student A is doing an excellent job pointing out words, that's telling you that this student is really benefiting from guided reading, and they might be graduating from this group soon, and maybe they're going to be working on a different strategy in the coming weeks. So just make sure that you have a place that you can take notes, especially while the students are reading. You can take notes. This is also great for parents, for parent-teacher interviews. They can see that you're taking notes and working with their child during guided reading. And then before you dismiss your students, just give them one piece of homework that they need to practice until they meet with you again. So you can say, all right, my friends, thank you so much. When you go and read individually or read to yourself during Daily 5, just keep in mind, I want you to notice any long A words in your books, or I want you guys to pay attention to why the character is choosing to da-da-da-da in your books when you're reading to yourself. So there you go. That's how you run an ideal guided reading session. Before you go, how do you know when it's time to switch things up? Well, maybe you've sat with the same group of kids for the last 3 months. It's time to switch things up. We need new people to interact with. We need new people to talk and think with. That's a good time to switch. Or maybe this student is doing an excellent job at all of the strategies that you've been presenting. Maybe it's time to start challenging them with a different strategy. So maybe it's time to move this kid out of the group and put a different kid in, or maybe it's time to just mix up all the groups in general, but you will know when it's time to switch things up. In my class personally, I don't have the same group of kids for more than, I want to say, a month. After every month, I kind of reshuffle the kids, look at their weaknesses again, and build on the groups, on the strategies. Before you go, remember you can grab my free guided reading cheat sheet at my website, 3peaksclassroom.com/guided reading. There you can grab this free cheat sheet for yourself. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up so that YouTube's algorithms can send this video out to other teachers who are also maybe struggling in this area. And you can also subscribe so that you don't miss any more episode in this series. Next week, I'm going to dive into my strategies cheat sheet and talking about being a lot more intentional with the strategies and understanding where students are at and what their needs are in order to progress in the reading progression. So I hope you will catch me in next week's episode. Bye.